well. On this first screen, we said, hey, we had a first part, and that was last week. Went very well attended. I sent out a replay to a bunch of the folks I knew that were there or couldn't make it. If you did not receive the replay, just drop me a line or send me a chat note, and I'm happy to resend that your way. It's been posted on YouTube. The response was very, very positive, so a lot of folks found that content useful. That being said, you don't need to have been at the first part to get lots out of today. They're certainly related, but lots of new stuff to go through. With that, I think we can get started.
Yeah, that sounds good. And I've got you on recording, Jeff.
So welcome, everyone. Just a quick note, your lines will remain muted through the call. You can certainly submit questions as we go through. I'll be monitoring that. We will make available a replay this session afterwards. So by all means, if you have to duck out early, I know some folks have let me know they can't stay the full time. We'll still have that available and make sure it gets posted. As mentioned, there's a download available for you in the chat area. If you wanted the downloads from the last session, let me know, and I can get those out to you via link. If you have questions as well, just keep them coming. I'll be monitoring that during the session. Next slide. I want to quickly introduce Kimberlee, our speaker for today. Kimberlee basically has done tons of great stuff. I think that's the summary. I first met Kimberlee at a conference with the ACMP and was immediately quite taken with the substance of the content that she was speaking on, and felt that if I could pick up some of these skills that she was talking about, it would greatly enhance my ability to serve my customers, my clients, and even just working within the network. Not only in the capacity of a change manager, most of you folks know that that's my occupation, but just as a leader and working with other leaders, these skills look like they would be very, very helpful for influencing and helping leaders to really do the things they wanted to do but felt incapable of doing at times. And that proved out to be true as I went through her program. So you can see lots of things on the page there that she's been involved in, and all that expertise has been pulled together in a variety of forums, a number of programs, and today we'll be looking at some of the research she's pulled together around the area of strategy realization. Next slide. So learning objectives, we'll first take a quick look at the visual landscape of change.
Oh, sorry, Jeff.
Go ahead,
maybe if I could jump in for a second. I had intended just for us to give a really quick look back to folks who weren't able to attend last time about Part 1 learning objectives. So just to kind of create the linkage, last time we talked about where are we strategically in the landscape of change management versus change leadership, and we did an assessment on that, and we located each of you individually, where are your change capabilities within that landscape, and what are your opportunities. We did a quick assessment on professional net worth, and we introduced the 7 strategic engagement skills. Those are the skills that we're going to be double clicking on today and going through in a bit more detail. Sorry, Jeff, didn't mean to take you down the wrong track there. We have just wanted to create the connection between the last session and this one. And I see a couple of folks have chatted in that they're interested in seeing the first session, so we'll definitely get you the link to be able to do that. Jeff, you want me to pick it up from here?
Yeah, by all means. Go ahead.
Okay. All right. Sounds good. So here's where we're going to drive today. First, we're going to take a quick look at a fact base that really is intended to be something for you to use with your organization and your business leaders that shows how these strategic engagement skills really improve project realization results. And as when I was a practitioner inside an organization, I found I never had the time to create something like this for myself. And so I would just go out and, Google things and try to find information that I would use to convince my sponsor to use change management and change leadership on our projects. And, at times it was really challenging to have enough justification to be able to really influence them to do that. And so the fact base is here for hopefully you to be able to use with your client base. The second is to take this assessment, and it's short, but to take an assessment, just kind of thumb in the wind, to get an idea of how well either you or your project are doing relative to these strategic engagement skills today. So you can look at it from the perspective of your skills as an individual, or how are things going on your project, or you can record 2 scores for each of the questions I'm going to ask you and kind of get a pictorial on two levels. And then finally, I'm going to give you a resource, at least one, for everyone with strategic engagement skills. So if we never have the benefit of working together again, you've at least got a place to go and start your own research and start taking actions on getting these engagement skills embedded in your initiative, as well as increasing your own professional net worth. So again, all of the facts are in the white paper that you downloaded today, so you don't need to take a lot of notes. And really, just to frame up the whole session, I thought this was a humorous. Hang on, I just want to check in on our recording and make sure we're doing okay there, and we are. I saw this sort of humorous cartoon the other day, and it kind of gave me a little snicker, because you see there's 2 fish, and they one of them at least did what he thought was a good thing, and he purchased a dehumidifier for the fish bowl. The challenge is that their environment is shrinking. The water level is going down. The good news is they know what's causing the problem, right? They made a mistake and they didn't get the results that they expected. Unfortunately, in business, a lot of time the water level is going down on our initiatives. We're getting unanticipated results. It's not what we really expected. And we don't know what the dehumidifier is. We don't know what to do to solve the problem. And so today, I'm going to suggest to you that there are 7 things, oftentimes, that are causing suboptimal results on our initiatives. And in fact, we've known about these for some time. We're getting more and more proof that these things exist, and we need to address them. But that really is going to be the substance of our conversation today. Now, when I talk about realizing benefits, what I'm talking about is really attaining the value that we thought we were going to get from a solution that we put in place over time, right? We might not get it tomorrow, but we've got a plan. If we say we're going to achieve $1 million in growth, we actually get there, even if it takes us 2 or 3 years. Contrast that to implementation, which our research suggests we spend a lot more time putting the solutions in place and doing activities than actually realizing the outcomes of those. And, a lot of value is lost in the process of that. And so I'm going to go very quickly through these first 10 to 12 slides just to kind of set the backdrop for you. But again, this is making the case for the kind of work we do, not in terms of a change management business case, but in making our sponsors, helping our sponsors to understand the actual economic and other impact of the value that we're losing because of the way we're managing our initiatives. Okay, so it's completely objective information that I'm sharing with you. So lost value costs us a lot. We're leaving a lot of money on the table. On average, executives report that they're only getting about 63% of the financial performance that they're promising their initiatives are going to get. And that's the best case scenario. About a third of them said they're getting less than 50%. So, just stop and think about, and this is just the financial value, think about the amount of money that's wasted, or the results that are financial results never realized, right, that are just out there in the ether. We're only getting 50 to 63% of the value. I'm sure none of our executives like to go to their CEO and report that. None of us like to go to our executives and talk about those results on our projects. And the idea here is that if we were to do things to more fully realize the potential of our strategies, we could increase that value to our companies by 60 to 100%. Imagine what even a small uptick in realization of value could do in your company today. So we're leaving a lot on the table. And part of the issue is that most organizations don't even track benefits realizations. So more than half of them don't have any process or anything formal, at least, in place to track whether they're getting the things they committed to doing. Of those that are doing it, 31% said that the tracking ends in an ad hoc way. In other words, they never really tie it out and make sure that they got what they anticipated. Only about 13%, about 1 in 10, track benefits until they're realized and reported on. And only about 15% go back and actually compare the results that they had promised to what they actually finally delivered. Okay, and so just by virtue of looking at it and thinking about making the connection between what we said we were going to do and what we actually did, we can improve realization results. Examples of value being lost on initiatives is just rife. It's everywhere. You look in every functional discipline, you look in every geography, and it's there. And again, I'm just going to pop through these real quickly, but 14.3 billion euros across 200 German multinationals value lost. In government projects in the UK, $2 billion in wasted efforts as a result of failed projects. 140 billion. This was in 2004, reported a couple of years ago. That's just IT project failures in the EU. Another government example, one Australian state failed to meet expectations on their initiatives, and not only did they not accomplish their goals, it actually cost them an extra 1.4 billion. And then the United States, here again, just IT failures. A small percentage, 5 to 15% of IT failures, causing losses of $50 to $150 billion. So if you really start to look at this around the world in companies in the top equity markets, the top stock markets around the world, and if you just look at like the top 10 or 12, this is the number of value lost. By extension, if we take 20% of value lost, 3% investment in an average company's portfolio, you get to $300 billion pretty quickly just in publicly listed companies in top markets. And so imagine if we included all the markets in the world, all the who are listed public companies, but in smaller markets, places like Portugal, for instance, and Venezuela and others who may not participate in their country's overall stock market. They have their own non-listed companies that are private, governments, quasi-government agencies. You get to $1 trillion in worldwide realization loss very fast. And it's not just financial. At the World Bank, who does all sorts of health and humanitarian work around the world, one independent agency who was looking at their performance, this was back in 2000, it's a little better than this now, estimated that their project failure rate was over 50%. And so what do you think that does for the quality of life or health for the people who should be the beneficiaries of these critically important human initiatives? And what is all this value loss, all of these initiatives that are not producing what's expected? What does that do for our employees? I mean, we've got 8 million people unemployed in the U.S. as of a couple of months ago, and by all accounts, this is much better than it's been. Certainly, economic factors affect these, but I think who among us could raise our hands and say, hey, we worked on an initiative in a company that, because of the way it worked out, people didn't have their jobs anymore. And it affects relationships with customers. 43% of customers said that project underperformance directly impacted them, particularly in terms of the company's reputation and their willingness to do business with them. And of course, if you think about things like safety programs, behavior-based safety, for instance, that was launched in the 80s, many of those programs, folks are now saying, hey, the cost and the long-term results are not what we expected. And you know what that means, right? That means injuries and potentially deaths due to underperformance of safety programs, and that's priceless. So there's a lot riding on our ability to fully realize the results of our initiatives, and a variety of management methodologies have been introduced over the past 30 years. So just think about some of these. And, this is, there's always good dialogue on this slide, at the bar after a live presentation because, excuse me, we always debate, well, when were these introduced and how big are they and what's their impact and all that kind of thing. So I put my own opinion out there for your review, but I think what's hard to argue here is that we've got some big heavy hitters in place over the last 20 years. Project management for sure has come up in a big way. Strategy management, and by that I mean balanced scorecard, strategy mapping, that whole suite of skills that came out of the Balanced Scorecard Collaborative. Change management, of course, growing rapidly. Even operational excellence in many, many companies, whether they call it lean, whether they call it TQM, which you don't hear so much anymore, but Lean Sigma, operational excellence in most places. Maybe you've got some of these in place in various stages of maturity in your organization. And if you do, that's good, because by all accounts, they're providing value. They're helping. So 70% of organizations had at least, one step too far. So 70% of organizations have balanced scorecards. More than half of the Fortune 1000, tons of companies reporting performance improvements and increases in profits. When you think about change management, lots of good data saying that projects with excellent change management are 6 times more likely to meet their objectives. Success rates for projects using change management as high as 96%. And project management. So firms that have mature project management offices in place in the organization have higher levels of results. No questions about that. And the number of firms with project management capability in place continues to grow. And so, we've got lots of evidence mostly from industry associations that we're getting value. But then the question comes up, okay, so why the disconnect? So if we're doing all these great things and we're investing in these capabilities in our companies, and that maybe they're providing value where they're applied and they're valued, but overall, project success rates have remained flat at about 64%, which is consistent with that 63% we heard executives report earlier in the presentation. They've been flat over the last 5 years. So it gets you thinking, wow, maybe you have to do those things just to get to 64%. And I think that there's no expectation that we're ever perfect. We may not ever get to 100%. But again, imagine if you're able to tip that curve just a bit from 64 to 70 to 75 or even 80% success rates. Imagine how much more your company could accomplish with even modest improvements in realization. So I've been curious about this for a long time. I really have spent a good part of my career working on this, but decided, like I said, since I never really had a fact base of my own, that I really was going to do some research around this. So I did a meta-analysis of 30 sources that I consider to be credible on, so what's going on with initiative failures? What's going on? So I looked at Bain and Deloitte and Economist and McKinsey and on and on. And here's what I found. There was a handful of, I'll call them causes, let's use that term loosely, let's say contributors to initiatives underperforming: lack of clearly defined outcomes, low senior management commitment, and maybe some of these are sounding familiar to you. Leaders don't share a consistent view that creates good prioritization and good trade-off decisions, so you've got all this stuff that has to get done. There's just not very good communication or information flow. I'm going to go through the blue ones for now. Middle managers lack capability, capacity, or are not engaged in the implementation process. Lack of adoption, motivation of employees to change behavior, or flat-out resistance, and performance linkages aren't in place. And so as I look across these, and again, just hold the 2 other colors for a moment, what clearly jumps out to me is that these in blue, these all have to do with the quality of leader engagement during strategy implementation. And I think so many of us have known this deep in our core through the years, right? But proof is now emerging that you can do all of these really good management control things, right? Project management, change management, risk management, portfolio management, strategy management. But absent a good quality of leader engagement during implementation, about as good as you're going to do is about 64% realization rates. Now let's go back to these other two for a minute. Insufficient funding and resources. So it's not clear to me at this point if that has to do with leader engagement or not. On its surface, it doesn't. It could mean, our company is just trying to implement things that we don't have the capital for. Or it could mean, we have the money to do this. We're just not making good prioritization decisions, and we're allocating the money to the wrong places, right? That's a leader engagement issue. Similarly, methodologies that are not valued or used, right? So maybe we've got change management or project program management in place in an organization today, and the leaders don't respect it, or they don't know enough about how to actually use the people who have those skills. Again, it could be because the methodologies don't work, or it could be because it's a leader engagement issue, right? They don't know how to use them, or they don't have the appropriate skills. So anyway, this sort of tranche of factors really got me thinking about, what do we need to do to develop these? If always at the end of an initiative, we're saying to ourselves, we did good, but if our leaders would have been more engaged, we could have done better, right? How many times have you thought to yourself, this is the best I've got, right? This is the leader I've got to work with. The challenge here is that it doesn't appear that companies are developing this niche skill set among leaders, right? They spend a ton of money on management development, which is like the routine stuff, right? Budgeting, head counting, goal setting, tactical, operational, staff meeting type stuff. They spend a ton of budget on future direction, guiding, vision, mission, right? And they do this in big sort of leadership development programs. But what about these 7 change leadership skills that we just talked about? Are we developing leaders and the people who support them in how to lead an emerging future like every single day, because they're implementing on the job, right? It's not just about having a 5-year plan anymore. Your end state might even be unknown. How do we help them dial up these skills during a time of change? And I found something interesting as well. Strategic engagement skills don't appear to be a current priority for chief learning officers. So if you look at their top 17 programs that CLOs report they're investing in for 2015, this is very interesting. Take a look at this. So, they're investing in that basic business acumen that you need to be a manager. And then they're doing sort of the big program stuff, long-term strategic planning. What does it mean to lead innovation? How do you manage your talent? The only one that I could see on that list of 17, I haven't listed them all here, but was the number 4, priority communication, which is obviously a part of leading change. But if you look at those 7, and I'll show them to you again in a minute, those 7 engagement skills, that's still pretty general, right? Are we really teaching leaders the day-to-day behaviors that they need to engage in during times of change? And it doesn't appear that we are. By the way, though, if you ask CLOs whether the money that they're spending on learning programs is tied to the business strategy, 3/4 of them say, absolutely, it definitely is. Okay. And so from my perspective, I think we may have a mismatch in expectations about what it really needs to be tied to the business strategy. It's one thing to tie to the long-term strategic direction. It's another thing to tie to what leaders actually need to be able to go and do right now. So here's the 7 skills that we just talked about. Inspiring, aligning, networking, translating, energizing, managing, and having someone who can play the role as a guide to the leader. You'll notice that this is a round model. That's because I don't think human behavior is linear, and any of these skills could be needed at any time. Although there's a rough order, right? We can predict to some degree how a change will roll out over time. But you may be well into the process of implementation and energizing the workforce and get a brand new leader. And a linear model doesn't really help you with that. You've got to go back to the beginning. And so this is a little bit, these skills are a little more agile than that. And we made the point last time, I'm just going to run through this really quickly. As change leaders, you have the ability, almost more than anybody else in the organization when you're working alongside these leaders, to influence those leaders' skills and how they're working with people, helping them tell good stories about the future state, helping them get aligned, and most importantly, making prioritization decisions, working across teams and networks to help surface conflict and get things done, working through others, through the leadership hierarchy, so that managers have really good coaching skills to work with their people. Engagement. So this is for those of you who are change managers, this is the one that's probably closest to traditional change management, right? Helping people actually make the behavior change. This is a tough one, right? Helping that change stick and making sure that we get the realization results over time. And then one that I think is probably the most important here, positioning. How do you make sure that when leaders need to be engaging in these behaviors on the job, you've got a working agreement with them. You're positioned to help them. They understand your role. They're accepting of your feedback and advice. And really, the point was we may need to make some mindset and skill shifts in order to be able to engage with them differently. So the idea today is that we step back and look at these 7 in a little bit more detail, and we're going to do that over about the next 50 to 55 minutes. We'll allow a little time at the end for questions. But at this point, it would be helpful if you could pull out page 7. And one thing that I want to point out here, the white paper that I gave you, I use with executives, right? So I work with C-level executives. Most recently, this was used very successfully at the Chief Strategy Officer Summit in New York City. There's about 500 executives there, and I presented, and we actually did this assessment live in the presentation with them. And so what you're going to see here is that the voice of this is not speaking directly to you. The voice is speaking to the executive. It gives you the chance to sort of listen in on the conversation with an executive. But for our purposes today, we're going to shift these questions just a tiny bit so that you can think about them not as if you were an executive, but for your own role in leading change, whether you're a project manager, business analyst, change manager, HR business partner. All of these questions are relevant for you and your initiative. So let's jump into the oh, I'm sorry, I think I just touched my keyboard and there we go. So let's talk about the first strategic engagement skill, Inspire. Inspire is about helping executives clearly define and articulate outcomes in a way that moves people to action. And so lots of executives I know, probably ones that you know too, they're very accustomed to using tables full of data, bar charts, histograms, pie charts, right? All of these things that are data. And they think that just because they've gotten them into a graphic form, that's it. That's all they need to get people to make the adjustments, the changes that they need to. And for sure, that's not the case. And I know all of you know that intuitively and intellectually. So the idea is, all right, well, how do we get them to do it differently, and how do we convince them to do that? So let me first give you an example of Inspire. I was working with a couple of executives a number of years back. It wasn't at Merck. It was in a previous assignment previous to that. And they were implementing an ERP. And there was one executive who did the first presentation. I want you to imagine that you're sitting in sort of an auditorium, to kind of whatever the town hall format looks like in your company. And this VP gets up on stage, and there's about 100 people at various levels in the room, and he's just got kind of like 3 bullet points on the projector screen behind him. And the first 2 were about quarterly results. And the third was about an upcoming ERP upgrade. And he said, so, our company's been having some problems. We can't track orders. Customers are angry. Our products aren't delivered on time. And we've got a lot of returns and tremendous inventory expense. And this overhead is impacting the cost of our products. So something finally had to be done. And as you know, we've been struggling with this for a couple of years, but upgrading is still not something we really wanted to do. It's time consuming and expensive, so it's something that we need to do. And it was a lot of hard work to implement the system last time. And, many of you were a part of that. This time we're going to need to focus on the upgrade of SOP, inventory management, A&R modules, along with a few other processes, at least initially. And just like always, I'm counting on every one of you to get it done. So Pat's going to get in touch with you in a couple weeks to talk about the plan and next steps. Thanks for your time today. So as you listen to that, chat me in a couple of reactions to what you heard. If you were sitting in that audience, how motivated are you to take action if you were a part of that executive's discussion? There's usually a couple of second delay, so I'll allow just a few seconds. What was your reaction to hearing that executive's speech? Roxanne says, negative focus, demotivating. Agreed. Blah, 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 says Dan. It seems you've been a part of a couple of these presentations, Dan. Good. What else? Yep, Jeanette says, here we go again. Yeah, so, I mean, that really was the reaction of people as they sort of filed out of the room. You know, there was some kind of eye rolling and like, oh, wow, I guess I'm not going to see my kids for a couple months because there's going to be all this work to do. So contrast this with a different executive that I work with who talked about doing the same thing in a totally different way. And he said, well, we're near the end of the presentation, so I just want to take a couple of minutes to talk to you about something that's really important. And I want to introduce you to Narita. Narita is one of our customers, and she's 4 years old and lives in Guatemala. She uses one of our products, and it dramatically improves the quality of her life. But her family doesn't have a lot of money, and they literally have to sacrifice in order to purchase our products for her. They live in a remote village and have challenging lives. In fact, our projects can only make it to her on the back of the donkey. And this is a true story. So today, when our product is produced, we don't know how to plan for the sales because we can't really forecast how much she needs. We think it takes 6 to 8 months to get there, though we're not really sure. And as a result, we overproduce and store for her because we know that it's going to take a really long time to get there. So we think that we need to fix that. And I see a day when we can get Narita what she needs on a reliable schedule and at a price that's not going to be a burden to her family. And just to prepare everybody, this is going to be a challenge, no doubt. But I think that you'll all agree that this little girl and our other customers too are worth our effort. The quality of her life is in our hands, and I would appreciate everybody's support on helping her. Pat's going to get in touch with you in a few weeks to talk about the plan and the next steps. And he says thanks and steps off the stage to applause. Right. And some people are clearly very emotional about this. So share with me a couple of comments about how this is different from what you heard initially. Roxanne says, appeals to our desire to do better. It's real and concrete. Yep, agreed. Other thoughts? It does give it a human touch, Jennifer. It makes it very real. Personal story allows us to know how our products are helping people. Sorry, I think it's Lois says, it's different, but I still don't know what I can do to affect that outcome. Good point. So when he says Pat's going to come talk to you about it, what Pat's going to do is fill you in on the project plan and the details and what it means for your role. So that's an excellent point. So as we coach leaders to tell stories, sometimes the initial story is really about purpose and often contains a real example of a customer. And the how are we going to do it and what's it mean for me actually comes next. But it really is, Dan says, yeah, he understands why and he feels connected. He feels empathy towards the client. So absolutely, you all have gotten it. And, why is this so effective, right? Why do we need to use stories? Well, so first of all, And here's where part of this fact base comes in. Intellectually, intuitively, I should say, all of us as people leading change, we know that this works better, but our executives don't always. And so here's some things you can share with them. So, I find that executives are often deeply dismayed to find out that 60% of employees at the frontline level cannot read an income statement. Executives love to believe that everybody digs the business as much as they do, and it's just not true. And so communicating them in terms of revenue and expenses and profit and all of those kinds of things tend not to have very much meaning that people are willing to act on the further down you go in an organization. And about 4 in 10 don't have the level of literacy that what their company stand for, what makes its brand different. So it's really hard for them to get excited about changes that have a business case only behind them. And behavioral science is not a field, at least in my opinion, like some other hard sciences, that literally there's a development on TV every day, a research study, things like that. Much of the base of knowledge that we've had for a very long time. Neuroscience, however, in the last 20 years, particularly in the last 5, has made a huge difference in how we should think about change. Because a lot more of it is brain-driven than we initially thought. We've known for a long time that most information that passes into our heads is processed by our subconscious minds. Right? 11 million pieces per second can go through your unconscious mind. You can only juggle 40 pieces a second in your conscious mind. And so telling stories appeals to people's unconscious minds and gives them something to carry away with them that they sort of cogitate on and they keep coming back to over and over. It lights up their whole brains. Neural coupling is the idea that the brain of the person telling a story and listening to the story, depending upon how the story is told, can actually show the exact same brain pattern. Okay, which means when you want people to feel like, wow, this person really gets me, I feel really understood, I can totally resonate with this, it's because you've been effective in neural coupling. And so here's our first question. So pull out your assessment. The first question is, okay, this all sounds like a great idea, but do you know how to coach your leader to tell that visceral, compelling story? And if you want to answer this for your project, you can say, are my leaders telling a visceral, compelling story today? And then go ahead and you can either shade it in, or if you're going to put 2 scores on there, one for yourself and one for your project, you can put a dot and we'll connect the dots at the end. But I'm mainly concerned about you at the moment. Do you feel like you know what that formula is to tell a compelling story and get your leader to be, that the words are coming out of their mouths, not yours? So if you're not thrilled about where your score is on that right now, here's a couple things you can do. Make the gaps that you're taught, the business gaps, visceral, right? Take that data and transform it from bar charts and pie charts and all that graphic stuff into something that is meaningful to people who are going to be hearing the story. So craft that compelling story and really surface motivations and options with the leader through powerful questions, right? Understanding the leader's motivations and why it's important to them and whether there's a story that they have in their life history that might bring this to life. You may not need to think up one for them. You may be able to tease out from their own life experiences a story that could bring the gap to life. A resource that I want to offer up to you, I don't know Nancy Duarte, but I love her book, Resonate. It talks about a lot of different kinds of stories that we can tell and sort of shows the sound waves for what they look like over time. It's a very interesting book. So if you want to learn more about how to incorporate storytelling into your work, certainly check out Resonate. Now, I think, Jeff, that I've actually taken the video out of here, but I'll talk through it quickly today, and then you all can go to YouTube and check this out if you like. So there's a movie called 12 Angry Men. It was produced in 1957, and it had a lot of folks in it who are going to be big stars later in life. And if you have a chance over the winter and you like older movies, on a snowy day, pull it down off of Netflix. If you just want to get a little taste of it, you can go to YouTube and watch the 2-minute trailer, and you'll see a little bit of the action starting to unfold here in still. But the idea is these 12 men, all of whom are white and middle-aged, have been called in to be a jury for a young man in the South in the 50s who's black and has been accused of murdering a young white woman. So, for those of you who have been following the developments in the United States and certainly in other parts of the world relative to race in the last couple of years, I think this story resonates as much now as it ever has in our history. But what comes out of this is the tension, the lack of transparency, the bickering, the differences of opinion, the one-upmanship, and all sorts of unhelpful behavior at a time when these guys need to have a consistent view and make decisions and prioritize quickly. Right? They don't want to be there indefinitely. And so the point here is that lots of times in change initiatives, we experience those exact same symptoms, right? When we need leaders to really make a decision, the stress level and the politics and all of those things are weighing on them, and it becomes very tough to get a decision. And the problem is, and you probably have experienced this, when leaders aren't making decisions, you are burning time on your initiatives. And you know what? The thing is, everybody sees it and believes it's a problem. 97% of employees and executives think that lack of alignment impacts the outcome of projects. But very rarely are we actually investing in actually fixing the problem, right? We don't know what to do. And, it says here 2.8 hours a week lost, hundreds of billions of dollars in paid hours. This is just in U.S. dollars, working days. So there's a productivity impact, but it also creates this feeling of tension and conflict, right? And so Bain also has a really interesting story. If you get a chance to check it out, most organizations have the potential to more than double their decision effectiveness. I mean, wouldn't you feel like you were in heaven if your leadership team doubled their effectiveness? I mean, I know I would with the teams that I work with, right? It would make our jobs a lot easier and really speed us toward more effective outcomes. Ultimately, a company's value is just the sum of decisions it makes. That's the conclusion that Bain comes to. In fact, shareholder returns generated by companies that are good at decision making and execution are fully 6 points higher. Now, 6 doesn't sound like much, but imagine what that means in actual dollars and cents returns. It's huge. And so helping leaders make decisions is critical, and overcoming those complex agendas and team function. And one of the things, I just put a little tile in here of the way we do it. We do it through asking only 5 questions, which people always tell me is impossible. But here's the thing. As change leaders, we can have no impact on decision making. We can make it more complex by asking 49 questions, right? Or we can make it less complex and more clear by asking fewer questions and showing the patterns. So here's my question to you. Item number 2, and you're going to fill this in on your worksheet, question number 2 in that red aligned section. For you, how confident are you in navigating those political agendas and all that dysfunction and getting leaders to make those decisions and prioritize so that what they're doing is consistent with what they say they want? How good are you at doing that? And if you want to think of this on a project level, on a project that you're working on today, are decisions agreed upon in a timely fashion? And are leaders doing what they're supposed to be doing, or are political agendas and other kinds of things getting in the way? If you're not as comfortable as you might like to be, here's a couple questions. Align has to do with navigating the political landscape, decoding those roadblocks. Everything is not bad behavior. And so the trick here really is to tease out the things that are important to the outcome and which are not, and work on those. And learning to serve as that neutral resource so people don't see you as invested in the outcome and are more willing to let you get involved and share. So let's go to the next one. Network is really about developing the plans and network to have a successful implementation. And so, really quick story. I was working in a plant some years ago, and I was a VP of HR over a series of plants. But we had one plant that was a major problem operationally, and so we got called in to go down there and figure out what was going on. We had this account for 30 years, had just been taken over by the Japanese, and they were not happy. And so they called us in, and a young, diminutive Japanese man came in, and he had this blue egg crate, and he turned it upside down, set it on the floor. And a moment later, his new plant manager, who was also a Japanese man, came in and stood up on the box so that he was eye level with all of us. And proceeded to chew us out for about 15 minutes. And to this day, I can't tell you exactly what he said, but we knew walking away from the situation that we needed to quickly fix the operational issues in the plant. And so when we talked to his assistant afterwards, he explained that we had 48 hours to get all the operational issues resolved. Or we were going to lose the contract, which was a $30 million contract. And so this was really where I learned that, we can put as much rigor and bureaucracy and reporting and all the rest around initiatives that we like, or we can think of really lean, fast ways to involve people and get problems solved quickly. And so that's what we did. And, lots of companies are evolving towards this more rapid style of implementation. Failure rates of big projects are higher than failure rates of small projects. So, the days of doing a 5-year project are largely over, right? It's all getting boiled down into things that are much smaller and much quicker. And I found this one really interesting. Lots of organizations are saying that they are not getting the value out of their project management offices that they hoped. They feel that they're introducing bureaucracy, and a bunch of them close within a couple of years. And so to me, that says the ones that survive are doing something right? And they're working closely with their organization. They're helping to make things happen. They're guiding facilitative functions instead of sort of command and control. And the other thing that the research says is that companies are moving much further away from that top-down project management, we're going to monitor everything and, make sure that it gets done and all that kind of thing, to really pushing more of the responsibility toward leaders, which in my opinion is who owns the accountability anyway. And this is a pretty recent study by CEB. 70% of organizations believe that their leaders didn't have the flexibility to effectively build, create, lead, and energize their networks to implement. So that's problematic, and it's an opportunity for us in change roles. So a question for you is, do you have an implementation network that you've gotten in place and skilled up to support your managers, and do they have local latitude about how best to implement? Or are you kind of relying on managers to do that on their own? Go ahead and answer that. And some tips here are, even organizations that have Agile, Agile is great for certain types of work. When there's a known outcome and it's a relatively linear path, Agile's fantastic. It gets you there in a real hurry. But in other situations where you have an unknown future and you don't necessarily have the latitude to proceed along that path, you need to find other ways to think about how to really support quick project team functioning so they get to the right solutions. Of course, developing and guiding a change network, making sure, at Merck we had 3,000 people, maybe more, 3,500, I would say. But the thing was, that wasn't their job. Right? That was a part of their job that got dialed up when it was needed in a local area. And so the managers came to rely on that heavily. Are you working with teams to surface and scale solutions instead of always designing new ones? There's a famous saying that every problem in an organization has already been solved by someone somewhere. Lots of times, though, the PMO or someone else sort of takes it upon themselves to escalate that to a corporate project, and all that good stuff is lost. And so you can certainly play a role in that, and also making sure those organization hooks, those enablers are in place. This isn't a new book, but it's a really good one, The Hidden Power of Social Networks. And I'm going to give all these to you again afterwards. But it really talks about how to identify people in the organization change network. So we're going to do one more, and then we're going to take a really quick sort of a stretch break. So this next one is harder to talk about, translate. Middle managers having the capability and the wherewithal to really engage with their people, to help bring the change home. And many years ago, I got a call in the middle of the night, and they said, you need to get on a plane to North Carolina and get down here immediately. So I got up dark 30. I was there first thing the next morning, and I walked into the plant and the plant manager's office, and on his desk were a hat, a lanyard with an ID on it, and a set of keys. And it belonged to one of our maintenance mechanics who had gotten caught up in a piece of equipment the night before and was killed. Now, this was devastating to all of us, and it was made all the worse by the fact that we had been deeply committed for the past 2.5 years to a safety program at the plant, which by all accounts on paper, we made tremendous progress. And if you looked at the change, we had everything: change management plan, communication plan, key stakeholders, union support, the CEO and the president of the company. This was a large company. It came down, they spent time at the plant. Everything you would have thought was needed to prevent this from happening was in place. And yet 5 guys went out on a piece of equipment one night, and they didn't lock out the piece of equipment, and one of them was killed. And so, we spent a long time really thinking about how do we fix this? How do we make sure this never happens again? And the managers themselves came up with a solution, which was, we could have done more. And, no one in the leadership of the company, even if we had told them that, they wouldn't have believed us. We didn't prepare them and really get them thinking through the implications of their role. And in fact, their role was to be the bridge between this faraway corporate program in Boston and the real implications of going home and seeing for this gentleman, his grandchildren at the end of his shift. By the way, he was set to retire later that year. He was 64 years old. And so I know many of you, you might work in office environments, and you might say, well, thanks for allowing me to learn from your example, but this isn't really an issue for us. But here's the conclusion I came to, and maybe this will resonate with you. If we weren't able to influence someone such that he behaved in ways that would save his own life, how hard do you think it is to get employees to make day-to-day process changes? Right? Pretty darn hard. And so a big part of the program that I share with people is really about how do we get those middle managers who are not always as skilled as leaders as we might like them to be, how do we get them to play that role? So middle managers are the bridge between these, big far off corporate priorities and their personal interests. And I'll tell you, I think this is more than whiffum. I think this isn't just what's in it for me. I think this is deeply, what does this mean for me, right? Not what do I get, but what does it mean for me as a person, right? That's the exploration that needs to happen. Just about everybody in the workforce, 84%, have had some recent shift. They've been reorganized, the process has changed, their job has changed, you name it. 2/3 of them report not receiving enough information. I'm actually surprised that's not a little bit more. I don't know how you feel, but I can never have enough information. And so it's sort of an unquenchable thirst. And this one's interesting. It's not a majority, but, there's some part of the population out there in business that has finally recognized that candid dialogue is the skill that has the greatest impact on overall company performance, right? Candor, the ability for managers to have what may be sometimes uncomfortable conversations and know what words they should be using to do that. And I love this one. When employees understand their role in the business, 91% work toward that end, but the numbers go down to 23% when they don't, a 68-point swing. And so for those of you out there whose companies may be struggling with engagement, here you go, right? This makes it pretty clear what it takes. So let's answer a question. And I think we've got a quickie stretch break set up for ourselves after this one. So the question here is, so how are you doing with your middle managers today? Are they really bridging that organization gap? Or, is there something missing there in the middle? And similar question if you're taking sort of a second data point on your project, are leaders at every level translating priorities to bridge the gap? And mobilizing people to action. So the first question about you and your skill, do you know how to do this? Does it seem to be working? And the second question is around organizationally in terms of your project. Do you see it happening? Here's some things you can focus on in this area. Personal implications, right? Not with them. It's not about what's in it for me, because as we all know, it's unrealistic to think that there's going to be something in it for everyone. And as a matter of fact, where we've evolved to in the last couple of years, most times there isn't something in it for people, right? It may represent a sacrifice, which is one of the reasons why bridging this gap and tying it back to the customer are so critical. Are you helping managers find those words? Do you know what the words should be to help them localize priorities with their folks? And really creating interim solutions to close the gaps. We already established we've got manager programs, middle management programs, leader programs. We've got all kinds of programs. And yet, to a person, every time I'm working with a group of change leaders, they all say, you know what? Our leaders don't necessarily have the skills they need to do this. Well, we can't stop. Right? We need to prop them up. We need to figure out some micro training or other skill building, but some micro ways to help them really bridge this gap with people. All right, so let's do this. Everybody, if you're sitting at your desk or if you're behind the wheel of the car, don't take your hands off the wheel, but do a couple quick shoulder rolls. Sit up in your chair. If you'd want to be able to stand up for a second and put your hands up in the air or touch your toes, go ahead and just kind of get your blood circulating for a moment. Hopefully, you all are participating along the way, and just in the next 3 to 5 minutes, Jeff's going to talk a little bit. Real quickly, like 3 to 5 minutes, about something that we are working on together. So, Jeff, do you want to share some of this information with the folks on the phone?
Absolutely, but first I have to test you, Kimberlee. So do you remember when I started the course, you asked everyone the question, what is kind of that one thing or two things that are prompting you to take this program at this time? Like, do you remember what my issue was at that time?
Yeah, I think it was about courage and candor.
Yep, that's it. I was really
did I get it?
Time. You got it. So you pass, and maybe an odd thing to hear coming from me, but I was really struggling with the fact, and it's interesting to see the numbers because I haven't seen this before. But you get 64% of the outcomes you're looking for, and that's how I felt. I'd kind of hit a plateau where I was executing tactics but not getting all the outcomes I wanted, attending meetings, walking away, and then people not doing what they said they would do, and just realizing the level I was working at was not going to get it done. I needed to raise my game, and I needed to have more influence with leaders we were talking about. Folks, for those who've been coming along with the slides, you've seen pieces on the slides that Kimberlee put up where it looks like a tool in the background or a formula when we look at storytelling. Those were some of the things that really helped me move to the next level, I guess I would say. And Kimberlee's fond of saying we can't be too reliant on tools. They can become a crutch at times, but they are about enabling the right conversations. And that's exactly what I found. And I apologize because I know I end up sounding like an infomercial when I say that, but the amount of positive benefit it has was huge for me. So this is the program we're bringing February 24th and 25th to Calgary, where we'll go through each of those 7 skills in much, much greater depth. You end up going through the skills assessment in much more depth. You've seen one question on there today. There's lots of things that go behind that. and you end up with a number of things that will really help you in terms of your practice. And that's whether you're operating as a consultant or you are a leader yourself and needing to influence others to ensure we achieve the results that we're looking for. Next slide. So those are some of the things that we include. So enhancing sponsor behaviors, how your role is positioned, guiding networks and project teams down throughout the organization, really driving engagement, which Gallup has clearly shown is a huge correlator with many, many positive outcomes in the business, and overall just deepening accountability among leadership. Interesting you included that quote, Kimberlee, because I've seen a number of folks respond that way from our program and others that have participated in the past, saying huge benefit to them taking that away.
I'm glad, Jeff, that you mentioned the folks who play various internal and external roles on the line, because this is the kind of thing, everybody starts with a different methodology, right? It may be AIM, it may be Cotter, it may be Connor, it may be ProSci. This is what layers on top of that to get you to the next level, right? These are about the influence skills that you don't get in those initial programs. You get a lot of tools, but this really is about influence and ways of talking and frameworks and discussion guides to really help you with the nitty-gritty of moving somebody to a specific behavior. So thank you, Jeff. I'm glad that you brought that up.
Obviously, Kimberlee's worked with a number of different clients, so you can see some of those big names there. Go to the next one. And there's some more of those quotes just saying how much folks got out of it. And these are, again, coming from folks at a variety of levels within the business, whether they're practitioners or they're leaders themselves. These were skills that they could put to use immediately. So there it is. Again, should remind folks, if you received a brochure from me or I end up handing one to you, you'll see a price of $21.95 on that. Because we're just introducing this into Canada, we said let's start it out at $19.95, but if you register by the 31st, we'll knock another $200 off that. Think about the potential of this. This is about raising your ability to do many things. Is that worth the price? I think you get much more than that back in value. If you can convince some friends to come, we can make the price even more attractive for you. So do drop me a line if that's of interest. I should mention, you're not going out alone. We're already seeing registration start, so it's good to see a response out of the first webinar we ran. And obviously, if you have other questions, just let me know.
Excellent. So, Jeff, you named that tune in 4 minutes, so thank you for that. I appreciate it. So let's head on to the next engagement skill, which is energize. And energize is really helping people get past not just anxiety and fear, but negativity, right? I mean, how many times do we work in an organization? We always call it resistance. And, a lot of times I think the things that we call resistance are actually just questioning, but it's questioning in a negative way, right? People haven't necessarily come up with a position yet. And my challenge to you is, so what are we doing to help people pass that? And really it involves working with the leaders, with people themselves, and with peers to help move them to new sets of behaviors. So really quick example of when a company that I work for wasn't able to get people past anxiety and negativity. We were in outsourcing. So, outsourcing in the 90s, this is when this was, really had a reputation for being a cowboy industry, for laying people off, all of that kind of thing. And it really was a very rough and tumble environment. And we were awarded in a contract at what is now Giant Stadium. And so we approached the workforce there. It was an electrical workers union, very powerful union. It was all men. Most of them had been there for 20 years or more, and they were electricians, carpenters, plumbers, maintenance folks. So anything that was needed for a rock concert or a football game to come in and set up, on a very large scale, these guys were there to do that. They really kept the place running. And so when we were called in, one of the things that we saw was that their pricing, their labor pricing, was about 150% over market. I don't know if we have any HR folks on the line, but I did say 150% over market. In fact, because of the work rules in the union contract, we had people, union electricians, who were making $250,000, $270,000 a year. And keep in mind, that was in the 90s. Okay, so we were way out of whack. And right away, their initial impression was, you're going to come in, you're going to lay all of us off, and you're going to hire non-union people, and this is going to be a big mess. And in fact, that actually was not our intention. We really wanted to do some process improvement, which may have resulted in a bit of right sizing. But all in all, we were really looking to get the operation in order not to impact the associates. And so about a month went by, and the tension level just continued to rise. We weren't doing a good enough job of really working with folks one-on-one and helping them to see what the future was going to hold. And so they stole things, and they wrote on the lockers with spray paint, and all put cherry bombs in the commodes, and all of this sort of bad stress behavior started to happen. And one example of that, the Barnum and Bailey Circus came to town, and a number of the maintenance leads who were on the job that day took it upon themselves to pry open our project manager's sunroof in his car and fill it with wheelbarrows full of elephant dung. Okay, message received. Again, all of you might not have exactly this type of a reaction in your workplace, but people do have stress behaviors, ranging everywhere from a little bit of absenteeism or barking out in a meeting all the way up to workplace violence. So things can happen. And sometimes, like in this situation, they're a little humorous to look back on, but most times, there is a direct attempt to deliver a message. And it's because getting back to the neuroscience, our brain's wired to take shortcuts. We run up our ladder of inference at the speed of thought. It takes just a fraction of a second to go from hearing or seeing something new, selecting specific pieces of data, adding meaning to it based upon your own life experiences, adopting those beliefs, and then taking actions based upon those. It takes you can barely get the sentence out of your mouth before someone has moved to what they're hearing, to what they're deciding to do about it. And so our managers need to know this, and they need to know what to say and what not to say, and how to help slow down the ladder of inference so that people can actually hear us and we can connect and talk about what to do. Negative thoughts also create feelings of fear and anger and irritation. This is not just because people are experiencing a change. We all walk around, every one of us, with mental chatter in our heads, starting from the time we get up in the morning, and 70% of it is negative. It's working against us, right? So that's the environment that it's not because they're not good people or because they're drawing the wrong conclusions. It's because most people are starting from a place of negativity when they hear about something new. And trust is essential. But as you probably know from your own company surveys or surveys like these, most people don't have a high level of trust in their managers. Even though 82% say they know trusting their boss is essential, more than half of them don't trust them, although the other half do say they feel safe communicating ideas and opinions with peers. So what does that tell you? As important as it is for managers to be capable of carrying the messaging and the local tactics around change, every time we implement a change locally, we need to have some peer outlets for people to be able to help each other. And if you look at your change plan and a lot of your peers' change plan, I'll bet you in a lot of cases that the peer support is not necessarily in there. So the quick question to you here is, are you using techniques and scripts to convert that individual discomfort and negativity into something you can use so that people can be productive and make the changes happen? Or if you're thinking about this on your project, are employees working with their manager and getting over this change so that they can return to productivity? If you're not where you want to be, and here's one of these little dialogue guides that Jeff was talking about. If you're not comfortable where you're at right now, the idea here is that we need to set up managers to coach their people. right? And we want to give them the tools to use, even the words to use or not use. And we don't want to overmanage them, but we really want to give them the resources to do it because, again, over and over, if we know our workforce isn't engaged and we know that our middle-level managers aren't necessarily as effective as they could be, we need to find ways to temporarily prop them up to close that gap. Interestingly, they get better and better at doing it over time. Right? Having these little micro bursts of skill building are much better than sending them to a management development program because they learn it by doing it. And also orchestrating simple peer-to-peer support mechanisms so that people are in a position to help one another rather than always putting the employee in the position to go to their manager for help. The next engagement skill is around accountability. Right? How do we really get the organization to manage this change over the long haul? Quick example, and I'm looking at the time, Jeff, so I'm going to accelerate just a little bit here. I once worked with a company where we had about 2,000 account managers working all across Canada, the United States, and Mexico and Puerto Rico. And what was interesting to me when I joined the company is that none of these account managers had an account level P&L. So they spent money, they ordered products, they kept track of employees' time, they did the timesheets, they took orders from customers, and they had no way of knowing whether they were making money or losing money for the company. And eventually they all got together, they realized this, and there was this clamoring for like a year, give us our P&Ls, give us our P&Ls. And so finally the leadership in the organization relented and we did a project. It took us almost a year in JD Edwards to sort of, disentangle all the accounting to be able to make it point to the right places. But we had a way to give them their P&L, their own individual P&L. And so we gave it to them and we trained them and they went away and they said, we don't like this and we don't want to do it. So there was a huge accountability problem. They said, oh, my manager is using the numbers to beat me up. And, I only have a high school education. I don't know about all this accounting stuff. And we heard every explanation in the book for why people did not want to take accountability for their P&L. And so the lesson here is even when people ask for the change, when they come to understand the personal accountability that it will mean for them, oftentimes their behavior shifts rather dramatically and rather quickly. So how are we going to create this accountability? Well, most companies that I know of are using the performance management process to manage people's accountability and say, hey, put this in your annual plan. This says that you're going to agree to do it. The problem is, and this is very recent data, this is only less than a year old, Buckingham and Goodall, reinventing performance management. If your company is not on the bandwagon to reinvent your performance management process, I'm suggesting it probably will be soon. Only 6% of managers believe that their performance management process is worth the time. 6%. I mean, that's dismal. 58% say their performance management process is weak. This is a global number. North American companies are 20% worse than the rest of the world. So performance management needs to be transformed. I love this next piece of data. DDI, which is a huge organization, did a study and asked people to rank order performance appraisal relative to a bunch of other things that they would rather have happen. And they said they would rather suffer a bad hangover or receive a credit card bill in the mail than face the prospect of a performance discussion with their boss. So, and only 55% of employees think it's performance management's effective. So, what do you think this means for realization if what we are relying for, the systems internally that we're relying on for accountability are in this kind of shape, right? This is not good news. And so my suggestion to you is, and what some companies are doing, we have a role in helping companies raise the bar. If we've got any IO people out there on the phone, this is a moldy oldie, but isn't it a good one? This basically says there is a level of anxiety that's okay to introduce into the organization to get to optimal performance, right? If you've got a low level, and let's replace anxiety with discomfort. Right. And so if you've got people who, it's like a sleepy Sunday afternoon when they come to work, you can expect to get a low level of performance. But if you start to raise the bar, create a little discomfort and give people the skills that they need, performance goes up a lot. By the same token, if you introduce too much discomfort, it goes down a lot, right? And so the idea here is, as change leads, by what we're doing on these projects, we can help companies raise the level of performance by how we're clarifying outcomes, how we're putting these working agreements in place, how we're handing off these projects to the business. So the question here for you is, how's that going for you? Are you creating agreements maybe that create a little bit of discomfort with groups or people in your organization to make sure that these project handoffs go really well, and somebody's going to own these things and see them through to the end to really get to realization? So how's that going on your, how's that going for you? And if you're also rating your project, are you monitoring goal achievement? Are your enablers in place? Do you have clear handoff accountability? Think about those kinds of things. Real quickly, if this is not an area of strength for you, really start looking at outcomes, right? Most of the approaches to projects that I look at continue to be very activity-based results as opposed to outcome-based. Raise the bar, as we just talked about, in the way you work with other people. Really look at what those outcomes are and how they're going to be passed off, and make sure that you've got the organization enablers in place to make them stick. And don't be afraid to have those courage and candor conversations that Jeff was talking about to make sure that the right accountability is in place. And I'm just going to take 2 minutes on this last one, Jeff. This is a picture I found on the internet. It's not my former sponsor, but it sure does look like him. His name was Ed. He probably had the most, I had the most difficult time with him out of most of the sponsors that I worked with. He really saw me as, though I did a lot of organization development work, as a personnel person. He came out of the government. And so Ed was not open to coaching on how to be a sponsor on major projects. In fact, he told me that what I was bringing to the table was psychobabble. That was a bad day. But I'll tell you, despite all of the discomfort of working with Ed, I still point to him as the single person that had the most influence on how I really crafted my own approach to influencing executives through the years. He was the first person to tell me, Kimberlee, never lead with your methodology, only lead with the business problem. And so, those little gems from Ed really stayed with me through the years and set me up to deal with people at the C level, but not without a lot of pain, I can tell you that. Many of you, I'm sure, have had Eds in your professional lives through the years, and the challenge is, you need to be capable of artfully applying the methods that you bring, not leading with them, right, but weaving them in, using them under the surface, and coaching leaders on how to behave with other people to really realize the benefits of the projects. And the problem is, this is just an example from PMOs, but I'm sure the same is true for change leads and others. Only like half of them are participating at the strategic level. Most of them are doing tactical project tracking, monitoring, change management plans, tools. And, a lot of people in our profession are seen as overhead. That's a problem. And we need to shift the perception of the value we bring and how we work. We also find that there's still not a lot of people in organizations that have change know-how. It's one of the top 6 challenges in implementing our initiatives. And I know it will come as no surprise to the folks on the phone that KPMG, this is a couple of years ago now, though I'm guessing it hasn't changed appreciably, 68% of projects still don't have a project sponsor who provides clear direction and addresses problems, right? They don't know how to be a sponsor. And so the trends you're starting to see now are increased number of companies using internal coaching and making sure that they're supporting those leaders in how they're interacting with people. Many are starting to use certifications. Some of those have internal certification programs, but you're seeing that this business of partnering really capable people who know how to do change alongside of leaders and making sure their services get used and it's helping the leader interactions is certainly increasing as a trend in organizations. So last question for you. is your role positioned as a strategic advisor? Now, in our last workshop, we had a specific definition of that. So for today, let's just say, are you working at the top of the curve? Are you doing sophisticated influence work with your sponsor, or are you kind of being used as a pair of hands, churning decks, working alongside project leads, folks like that? What's the level that you're working at? Are you in the right place and contributing maximum value and getting maximum rewards for yourself? If you're thinking about this in terms of your project, are you and your team positioned as strategic coaches to leaders? So go ahead and fill that out. And at this point, for guide for number 7, you can write your score in the middle, and you should begin to get a sense of, hey, what's my pattern? Am I high on my ability to energize the workforce, but in terms of inspire and align, my scores are really low, so I don't have the leaders on board, and it's only a matter of time before we have a problem. You really kind of step back from that and say, what does this pattern say about my skills? What does this pattern say about the project that I'm working on? So, some tips on positioning your role. Make sure you've got working agreements in place. I'm very reluctant to call, Jeff knows I have a bias around the word contract because no one likes to be contracted with. And yet, most people who build change capability tell you that's exactly what you should do. Working agreement is more flexible, it's more organic, it's more natural. It really puts you in a position to accelerate your relationship with a sponsor. Building the capacity to have mutual feedback, one of the biggest levers that you can have to move up the scale and do more sophisticated influence work. Plus, my goodness, I could probably do 5 pages on this page alone. It's one that I'm very passionate about, but being a source of influence, developing your presence and gravitas, right? Gravitas is that certain something someone has when they walk into the room that that while they look friendly and approachable, you should take them seriously, because they have something of value to contribute. How are you at telling your story, right? Do you use the word change management? And if you do, what kind of reaction do you get to that? Maybe do you need a new story? One resource that I love, and it's only a tiny little book, but it's called Helping by Edgar Schein. It's another one that's been out there for a while, but it really is about positioning yourself to provide someone who is in a more senior position, how you can offer help and get your help used. And in our roles, I find that incredibly important, particularly because lots of times it's not so easy to access the senior executive, and sometimes we have to go through other people. And so really being able to influence our way through that sort of spider web of relationships to get to the sponsor is really important. And Helping is a really quick read. It's a little academic, but it's still worth the read. So there they are. The strategic engagement skills. I will send you this slide that has all the resources. This is our methodology. Again, this is the what. This is the series of phases that we would look for a person to go through during a time of change. And these are really the skills that we want to build in our change leadership ranks. You obviously have a significant role in making sure strategic engagement skills are addressed, both building them for yourself and making sure that you're helping leaders build these and use them on projects. So my ask of you is, take a look at the business case for these capabilities and talk to your business about them, and try to facilitate alignment and approval to kind of, pick a couple pilots and get these capabilities integrated. And remember, this doesn't have to cost a fortune. The invoice for improving these capabilities is pretty modest, considering that you could potentially raise the financial performance of your initiatives by 60 to 100%, right? So this is a small investment for a potentially huge return. So that's it. Thank you so much to all of you. And on behalf of everyone who would benefit from your raising the waterline on realization in your organization, I really appreciate being here today, and am so gratified that all of you are out there working on these important projects. So thank you for that. Jeff, I know that we are short on time, but we do have some time for questions and any other points that you think it would be beneficial to make.
Yeah, absolutely. So if any folks want to type in a question, I'm monitoring that box. We've had some great comments throughout the program. I've been using the chat box as well, sending out links to those books that were mentioned.
Awesome.
And also a link to the Center for Strategy Realization if you want to take a look further at that program. I will mention as well, I do have hard copy brochures and some other materials that Kimberlee's provided to give you more depth around some of these elements. So if there's anything else you're looking for, just let me know. No questions so far. It could be that they're thinking, gee, you know, maybe I need to go get some lunch. I know
I can understand that.
Last call. Any other questions?
Lois says, great stuff. Kay says, thank you very much. Glad you like the information.
Yeah, Patricia, thanks. Appreciate the comment as well.
Very good.
Right, well,
with that, Jeff, should we close her out?
We should. Again, if you want to chat some more, I will buy you a free coffee. I swear. Out of the house. All right. Thanks, everyone. Appreciate you taking the time today. We'll send a replay out as well.
Thank you very much. Have a great day.